Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing a G4400 paired with a GTX 1050 Ti on many games. This is a 2-core 2-thread CPU. I usually test 2-core and 4-thread chips. So in this video I'm just going to show you gameplay on just that hardware, the G4400 plus 1050 Ti plus 8GB of RAM. And well, just explain you what's going on. So I'll start with Battlefield 1 multiplayer. This is a 64-player match on one of the maps that I had the most issues with. I'm using a mix between medium and low. And after like a minute or two, I'm going to lower the settings to the minimum to see no difference at all. As you will see in the bottom left corner of the video, there's a graph. That's the frame times graph, which is the time of frames test on screen before jumping onto the next one. And as you can see, there are many spikes. Those will be considered stutters. The bigger the spike, the bigger the stutter, because it just varies the time that a frame stays on screen. That just makes the game feel very uneven and just not smooth at all. And well, we are below 30 frames per second as well, so that's another thing to keep in mind. Lowering the resolution doesn't help because the CPU is a limiting factor here. As you can see, the GPU is at a mere 31%. I mean below 50% pretty much all the time. This game uses quite a bit of CPU. By just having the 2 extra threads on the G4560 or an i3-6100, it makes a huge difference. I mean, we can get even close to 60 frames per second in that case. So yeah, I don't recommend Battlefield 1 multiplayer with this hardware. GTA 5, I'll be doing 1080p with lower draw distances, plus high settings, pretty much. And well, I'll just be exploding cars, moving around with a car, just fighting with the police and all that kind of stuff. And you'll see that the game stutters quite a bit, plus there's a lot of pop-in, because the CPU is not loading assets fast enough. So yeah, the more you play the game, the more it stutters. GTA Online should be even worse than this because it uses more CPU, at least on my end. So the best chance you have here for more consistency is to cap the game at 30 frames per second, but that won't fix the game 100%. So as I move through the map, it's loading more assets, and the CPU just cannot keep up.
Blast on me then, bitch!
Assassin's Creed Origins, again 1080p, and on the graphic settings I'll be pretty much using high with the draw distances lower to low, which in this case is called environment details. So well, this was very GPU intensive for what I could see, but a lot of people told me that the town of Alexandria was very CPU intensive, so I just went into that area. And well, so far from the beginning you'll see, oh, 30 frames per second, that's great. It's not maxing out the GPU, but at least it's 30 frames per second, right? No, when you're moving through the map, you'll suddenly get a freeze and the game will just be there, frozen. You can move the camera, all that kind of stuff, but the character is just frozen there, and everything is frozen except the camera that you can move. You can still hear sounds, all that kind of stuff, but the game is just frozen, and on the bottom right corner of the screen you'll see that it's loading. So the game didn't finish loading the assets, so it's just waiting for the CPU to finish with that. So I'll consider this one unplayable so far. I played like 10 minutes, whole 10 minutes the game was like this, and getting even worse and worse and worse. So I recommend you avoid Assassin's Creed Origins. It just doesn't load the map fast enough. Even at the lowest settings and lowest resolution, it doesn't make a difference. So yeah, I recommend at least 4 threads for this one. With that, it's more than enough for 30 frames per second. Batman Arkham Knight, again 1080p, and well, textures will be on normal because on high I got more stutters, despite having enough VRAM for that, and well, all the NVIDIA Gameworks stuff turned off, and I'll just jump into the Batmobile and be going very quickly through the map, and you'll notice quite a bit of stutter and pop in. That's because, again, like on the other games, Assassin's Creed Origins, GTA 5, it's just not loading the map fast enough, so the game will just freeze for a second, load the assets, and keep going. This one is not as unplayable as Assassin's Creed Origins. I mean, when you're outside of the Batmobile, just not going that quickly through the map, maybe doing a mission when you're fighting or investigating is fine. But if you're just fine with that and want to play this game, it can still be playable outside of those transporting moments, for saying it some way. So if you want to play this one, I recommend you just know what you're getting yourself into.
All units, Batman's on foot. Keep a lookout.
Shadow of War, I'll be doing 1080p, like a millionth time I said it, and I'll be using a mix between medium and high settings with ambient occlusion on low, and well, I'll be just doing a fortress battle, which means that there will be a lot of NPCs on screen, which is a huge hit on the CPU. And well, this one surprised me actually, because I didn't see any major stuttering so far. I mean, the game is not running perfect, but it's over 30 frames per second the majority of the time, which is what is most important. This surprises me because there's a lot going on, there are many enemies on screen, they are fighting, and there's just a lot going on at once. When you're traversing the map, it can stutter quite a bit because it's loading assets like on the other open world games, but it doesn't freeze like the other ones waiting for the assets to pop up. Frame times are a bit variable, but it's not unplayable at all. I enjoyed my time with this one. I recommend using a controller. It was one of the ones that wasn't really unplayable at all. Even running very quickly wasn't a problem for this CPU. Just as a start of the level, you might see a stutter at the beginning because it's finishing loading all the information it needs. But so far, fighting with many enemies on screen wasn't a big trouble at all. The CPU could handle it just fine, it seems.
Hold this ground! The Bright Lord! Charge! Hit it! Hold fast!
The Witcher 3, I'll be doing once again 1080p. I'll be using a mix between medium and high pretty much, and on the post-processing most of the stuff is enabled, but it doesn't make much of a difference the stuff I turn off. Most of them are just visual stuff that I don't like. And well, I'll be going into Novigrad, one of the most CPU intensive places of this game, And as I get into Novigrad, the game just freezes for a couple seconds, because like on the previous games, it's just loading new assets and the CPU is just not going to keep up. But after that is done, the game is just over 30 frames per second most of the time, with some stutters every now and then when something pops up on the screen. But remember, this is one of the CPU intensive places of this game, so outside of this area, just like in an open environment or in a forest or something like that, it shouldn't be as bad. So yeah, this one is not unplayable.
Ah! There must be order.
Chance to surrender unorthodox boats.
Why? Buy tomorrow what you can buy today.
Now Overwatch, so I'll be using dynamic reflections on low, model detail on medium, so the CPU is stressed as little as possible, and refractions on medium. The rest is cranked up to high. And well, so far, as you'll see on the screen, we get the GPU usage below 80%, so we're getting some CPU bottleneck there. But the game is most of the time over 60 frames per second. When you're just getting shot or something like that by many people at once, you'll get drops below 60 frames per second. I didn't see the game drop below 40 FPS, and so you'll see when many people are shooting at me at once, there will be a big drop to 40 FPS, but the game is still totally playable if you ask me. It didn't get worse and worse like the open world games I tested. Of course, this is an open world, but it can get very intensive very quickly, so just something to keep in mind. So yeah, this one is just fine.
Move out.
Be right back.
Death comes.
Hitman, I'll be using DirectX 12 because it used less CPU for what I could see. Level of detail will be on low since that's pretty much the draw distance, and the rest mostly on medium settings with SSAO enabled. Well, I'll be just going into Marrakesh, which was the most CPU intensive map that I found so far, and it was at 30 frames per second most of the time. Everything was fine when I was just moving through the map. But as I started some chaos there and the AI got crazy, the game dropped to 20 frames per second in an instant. So when your cover is blown and you just have to fight for your life in this game, it will just drop to 20 frames per second, at least on this level. So yeah, as long as you're stealthy, the game will run fine.
Hello? I could just about strangle you. Stomach cramp. What kind of thing? Don't come up a thing.
World 4, I'll be using something like high settings with God rays on low. The object, actor, grass and item fade will be like at 75% and the draw distances on medium. I'll be just into Diamond City looking at the whole city at once, since that's what gave me a big hit to the frame rate. The CPU was over 90%, but it was over 30 frames per second most of the time, with some drops below that target every now and then. It was still more than manageable. It's not that bad, but on very intensive places like Diamond City, the Corbega factory, Boston, something like that, expect some drops below 30 frames per second every now and then.
Latest hairstyle from the upper stand.
Move along.
Don't let down the home team by a squat.
Self-prescribed Kim, as recommended by me, myself,
My God.
and I.
CSGO, you can see both of the options that I used. On the left you'll have the lowest settings, on the right you have the highest settings with 2 times MSAA, plus the average frame rate on both of them. I used this benchmark tool since I wanted to compare the lowest and the highest settings, so don't take this as the 100% real performance, since when you're playing the game just like one of the bomb scenarios or something like that there's not that much going on. There won't be drops below 60 frames per second. This is just a stress test, it runs the same thing twice. I could compare the settings. So yeah, so far it seems that the game is running just fine. PUBG or Playerunknown's Battlegrounds. I'll be using very low post-processing, very low effects, low view distance, and the rest on medium or low settings, with anti-aliasing on high, since it wasn't a big hit to the GPU. First I'll show you the lobby, which is full of people. There it drops below 30 frames per second. Then I'll just show you parachuting to the area I was falling into. Then I'll just get into a car and start driving through the map in one of the towns that I had the most performance issues at. The game was over 30 frames per second, but the frame times are so inconsistent. As you can see at the top left corner of the video, that graph peaks in the frame time. When that happens, you feel a stutter, so it's just happening all the time. The frame times are very inconsistent, so the game feels inconsistent. Don't get me wrong, the game is still playable, but you will be at a disadvantage. So I recommend capping the game at 30 frames per second, so the frame times are more consistent and the CPU has less work to do. So yeah, overall the game works over 30 frames per second, but the frame times are inconsistent. Just Cause 3, 1080p once again with level of detail factor on medium, and most of the stuff on medium or high. And well, in this big city, I'll be just flying around and blowing up some gas stations. And as the footage starts, you'll see drops below 30 frames per second by just flying around. That happens on places with a lot of buildings on screen, plus the character just traversing through the environment. I'm blowing up the gas stations is because it's one of the biggest explosions that you can find in the game. So yeah, the game can drop below 30 frames per second pretty easily by just blowing up a gas station or flying around in a place with skyscrapers all around you. But the more you play, the game will be getting worse and worse, just like it happened on GTA 5 and Assassin's Creed Origins. So the game will stutter more and more as you play it, so keep that in mind. It's not a perfect experience by any means, and since the game is centered around destroying stuff, it'll drop below 30 frames per second over and over and over again. Rise of the Tomb Raider, I'll be using DirectX 12 and 1080p with a mix between medium and low settings. Especially draw distance will be on low, so the CPU has less work to do. But this time around, I recommend you once again to cap the game at 30 frames per second, since you'll see that the frame times are very inconsistent. It can vary quite a bit, which is annoying where you're trying to aim your bow at an enemy or something like that. It'll just smooth things out, but you'll see quite a bit of pop in. I'm talking about grass, 3D models, all that kind of stuff. It just pops up when you're running around, even NPCs. So that's something to keep in mind if you want to play this game. 30 FPS cap will be recommended, and you'll see quite a bit of pop in. That's most of the stuff that you should care about when thinking about purchasing this for this CPU.
Lara, I'm sorry if Sophia was less than welcoming.
I understand. I'm just glad you were there to vouch for me.
My people have spent decades fighting outsiders. It's not an easy habit to break. See if you can lend a hand with the preparations. A little hard work will go a long way towards building trust.
I'll see what I can do. They will likely come from the air.
And finally, Doom. I'll be doing 1080p with TSS AA, and you'll notice that I'm using OpenGL 4.5 instead of Vulkan. Well, that's because Vulkan, when I tried it, the game just got a black screen and I wasn't advancing at all. I couldn't load into the game, so keep that in mind. Vulkan was just not working at all for me with this CPU. In this area I was testing, it was over 50 frames per second, the game was very smooth. And here the frame times are still amazing. I don't know how this is even possible, but great, it seems that Doom is just a great PC port so far, great optimization. So on this one, 2 cores and 2 threads is enough. Okay guys, so now conclusion time. For what I could see, this CPU on some games is or the games don't launch, or if the game is open world, you're just getting freezes when you're moving fast through the map. For example, Assassin's Creed Origins, Batman Arkham Knight, you'll just get some loading screens when you're traversing through the environment, which is very annoying. On the Batman game at least, it's just for a couple seconds that it interrupts you, but on Assassin's Creed Origins it can be over 10 seconds, which in my case means unplayable for me, just running around. GTA 5 stutters a lot, and the more you play, the more it stutters. So after like 10 minutes of playing the game, you won't want to keep playing it, it's just unbearable. And for example, Doom couldn't launch the Vulkan API, the game just got a black screen. So yeah, most big games nowadays need more than 2 threads. I'm saying that because the i3-6100, G4560, those are also dual core CPUs, but they have hyperthreading. That means that they have 2 cores and 4 threads, instead of 2 cores, 2 threads that we have here. And that makes a huge difference. Just see my channel. All the games I test are tested with a dual core with hyperthreading, and then a quad core to see if we get better performance. And today on Amazon you can find the G4400 for $53.60 US dollars, and the G4560, which is a 2-core 4-thread CPU, is at $82.99, so it's pretty much $30 more expensive, but you'll get way less stuttering, way more consistent frame times, and the open world games won't get those loading screens in between, which is a huge difference for only $30 more in my opinion. So many games won't be unplayable, but open world games have a lot of problems with this CPU because it's only 2 threads. So yeah, if you're playing Overwatch, CSGO, something like that, it's not about CPU, it can still hold up just fine. Even for Shadow of War, there are some exceptions on open world games apparently, but I'll save up some more and try and get a G4560, G4620, G4600, something like that, or even an i3 from the 7th gen and before, since those are 2 cores and 4 threads. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video and it was useful. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.